I hadn't seen my father in nearly 6 years. When I stepped into that sterile conference room at Keller & Morris LLP, the first thing he did was scowl at me like I was a plumber showing up uninvited to Thanksgiving dinner. The air smelled of polished oak and old money, the kind of place where people pretended dignity was currency. Across the polished table sat my sister Sloane, legs crossed, wearing a navy suit that looked custom-tailored for self-congratulation. The chair at the head of the table was occupied by Jackson Keller, my father, who still styled himself as a self-made tycoon, though most of his empire was built on things my late grandfather had handed him on a silver platter. Margot Morris, the family lawyer who'd been handling our affairs since I was in braces, gave me a polite but distant nod. Nobody stood, nobody hugged me, nobody even asked about my last deployment or cared whether I'd come back with both legs. And honestly, I didn't expect them to. I didn't come for them. I came because I promised Grandpa Frank I'd be here. Before he passed, he looked me straight in the eye over weak diner coffee and said, "Hannah, no matter what they say when I'm gone, show up. You need to be there." So I was there. Margot cleared her throat and opened the leather-bound folder, her voice crisp and flat, as if she were reading aloud an instruction manual for assembling a shelf you didn't want. To Sloane Keller, she began the summer home at Bear Lake and the family's antique piano. Sloane gave the faintest smile, though she clearly expected more. To Jackson Keller, she continued a first-edition Hemingway collection and a $15,000 donation to the National Business Ethics Council in his name. Jackson let out a derisive snort at that, ethics being the one thing he'd always treated like a punchline. Then Margot turned a page, her voice steady. "And to Hannah Keller, my granddaughter, my trusted confidant, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes all financial holdings, real estate, and majority voting shares in Keller Dynamics Incorporated, effective immediately." The room fell into an icy silence. Jackson's jaw tightened. Sloane's composure cracked just slightly. Then, as if scripted, Margot slid a check across the table. $42,000, crisp, signed, dated. I hadn't even reached for it when my father lunged, snatching the check like it was a venomous snake. His face twisted in fury. "You think this fixes anything?" he hissed. Without hesitation, he pulled a lighter from his suit pocket, struck the flame, and set the check ablaze. The fire curled the paper as it consumed the signature flames, licking the number that represented my inheritance. Sloane gasped. Margot didn't even flinch. She leaned back slightly, as if this wasn't the first time she'd watched a man torch a fortune out of spite. Jackson stared at me, fire reflected in his eyes. "That's what you get for abandoning this family," he spat. But I didn't flinch. I didn't plead. I didn't even speak. Instead, I smiled a tight, cold smile. The kind you offer when you've already seen the ending and you're just waiting for everyone else to catch up. Because what he burned wasn't what he thought it was. Jackson didn't see the slim envelope tucked safely in my coat pocket, the one Grandpa Frank handed me a month before he died, folded inside a napkin. His last words still rang in my ears. "Don't open this unless they try to destroy what's yours." They had, so I would, but not yet. I sat there silent as my father raged, and Sloane demanded audits, claiming something wasn't right, that Margot must have forged the documents. Jackson's voice rose and fell in fury, accusations swirling, all while the ashes of that check floated onto the polished mahogany table. Inside me something solidified, not hatred, not sadness, but certainty. The kind I'd learned to respect in Kandahar, where I spent nights invisible, watching, waiting, calculating. They thought they could erase me with flames and shouting. They thought burning the paper would burn my name out of their lives. They never understood that the power didn't come from paper. It came from the truth I carried, and I carried it close. When I finally rose, I didn't slam the door or offer some cinematic exit line. I just walked out, steady boots clicking on the polished floor of the firm. The parking lot outside was nearly empty. The cracked asphalt and crooked oak tree at the gate felt eerily familiar. I used to climb that oak when I was 8 before Jackson told me girls don't belong in trees. That was the first time I realized I didn't belong anywhere near this family. The drive back to my tiny apartment on the edge of town was quiet. No radio, no noise, just the hum of tires on pavement and my own heartbeat. The envelope Frank gave me felt heavier by the mile. I laid it gently on the passenger seat, but didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I poured a glass of water and stood at my kitchen window, staring at a street I didn't particularly like but never left. That day's events churned in my mind the inheritance and the fire, the cold silence. It felt familiar. It felt exactly like that first Thanksgiving, after my return from deployment, when Jackson's only comment was, "You didn't write. Not welcome home. Not glad you made it back." Just quiet disappointment that filled every corner of the house like secondhand smoke. And when I went upstairs that day, my bedroom was gone. Physically gone. Replaced with beige armchairs, a fake orchid, and a framed inspirational quote about calm waters. It looked like a dentist's waiting room. The door that used to say Hannah now said guest. Sloane passed me in the hall that day, cradling a mug of peppermint tea. She didn't even stop, just smirked and said, "Don't be so dramatic. You were gone for what, a year and a half." That was the last day I ever stayed under their roof. Now alone in my kitchen, I reached for the envelope. It was thick, sealed in wax. Frank always used wax seals, said they made things feel official. My fingers trembled only slightly as I cracked it open. Inside a single sheet of paper and a USB drive. The paper was a notarized trust transfer form executed and dated 3 weeks before Frank's death. The check my father burned, a decoy. The real inheritance, already transferred. The account number at the bottom ended in Frank's birthday. Reversed. He knew I'd recognize it. He always saw me, really saw me, even when no one else did. I grabbed my laptop and plugged in the USB. No password, no delay. Just one folder labeled simply proof. Inside bank records, legal authorizations, a draft of a second will corporate transfer documents everything. It was airtight. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it didn't last. When I logged into my bank's app, to confirm the account, I hit a wall. Account not found. I tried again, slowly, carefully. Still nothing. I called customer service. The representative, a bored-sounding guy named Chris, asked for my details. After a brief pause, he said, "I'm sorry, Miss Keller. Our records show this account was marked inactive." "What does that mean?" I asked. "Deceased," he replied. "Certified 2 weeks ago." I hung up before my voice cracked. The next morning, I stood at the DMV with my ID in hand, ready to fight this bureaucratic nightmare. But the clerk frowned at her computer and shook her head. "Ma'am," she said gently, "you're flagged as legally deceased." I stared at her. "I'm standing right here." I can see that she replied. "But the system doesn't. You'll need to file a correction through Vital Records. Could take months." I walked out into the parking lot, stunned. Somewhere, Jackson or someone close to him had filed the paperwork. They hadn't just burned a check. They'd erased me on paper. My credit, my accounts, my very identity. But the thing about ghosts is that they learn how to move unseen. And I wasn't going to stay erased for long. The sky outside was heavy with that pale gray you only get when the weather can't decide between fog or drizzle. I sat in my car across the street from my old elementary school, staring at the red brick facade, as if it might offer some clarity. The DMV clerk's words still rang in my ears. "You're flagged as legally deceased." Those words shouldn't belong to someone like me, a woman still breathing, heart-pumping eyes wide open. But apparently, in whatever warped game my father was playing, I was a ghost. And in America, it turns out if the paperwork says you're dead, you might as well be. I tapped the envelope from Grandpa Frank on the passenger seat, the one I hadn't let out of my sight since that disastrous meeting at Keller and Morris. That envelope was my anchor. The USB inside held a detailed record of every dollar, every decision Grandpa made in my favor, but the very systems that should have protected me were quietly working against me. They'd filed my death certificate, somewhere sealed it behind official doors. And now, my accounts. My credit, even my social security number, all suspended, inactive, erased. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about money or revenge for leaving the family business. No, this was about erasure itself. Jackson Keller didn't just want me out of the will. He wanted me out of existence, off the map, off the books, like I had never been born. It was a power play wrapped in paperwork and bureaucratic knots, cold and surgical. And he was damn good at it. But I had learned a few things from war zones and sandstorms. Power only works when no one is watching. So I decided to make someone watch. I drove straight to a dusty office building on Ashland Avenue, a place my friend Charlotte used to call the graveyard for secrets. It was the office of Sylvia Pierce, a private investigator and former civil rights attorney who made a living taking down landlords who forged eviction notices and companies that buried sexual harassment claims in NDAs. Sylvia was a survivor herself. Lean, sharp-eyed, always dressed in second-hand clothes that looked somehow better on her than they ever did off the rack. When she opened her office door, her expression barely flickered, though she clearly wasn't expecting anyone. "Hannah Keller," I said simply. "I'm not dead, but my family thinks I should be." That was all it took. She stepped aside and waved me in. Inside her space was a chaos of mismatched file cabinets, 2 dying plants, and stacks of case files that could have brought down half the city council. I handed her the USB and the death certificate printout from the DMV. She sat fingers steepled, listening without interrupting as I laid out every detail: the check my father burned, the inheritance already transferred, the bank accounts locked, the official record of my death processed through a court order I'd never seen. Sylvia's response was quiet and precise. "You're not fighting your father. You're fighting a machine he knows how to manipulate. We need proof, hard evidence, and we need it fast." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but underneath, I heard the click of someone who'd found a case worth burning some bridges over. She pulled out a battered legal pad and began listing what we'd need: certified copies of my birth certificate and military discharge papers to challenge the death certificate, court filings to force disclosure of who filed the motion that marked me dead, and most urgently evidence that my signature had been forged to transfer control of Keller Dynamics before my supposed death. Then she said something that almost knocked the air out of me. "Your name isn't just erased on paper. It's a statement. Someone wanted you dead on paper first, so they could finish the job in other ways later." I hadn't thought about that, but once she said it, it felt true in my gut. In my father's world, the paper trail was just step 1. Sylvia looked up at me, one eyebrow raised, her expression sharp, but almost kind. "You ready for this, Hannah? Because this isn't just law. This is war." I nodded slowly, the shape of this new reality settling over me like armor. By dusk, I was back in my apartment, staring at my own face in the bathroom mirror, wondering what version of myself would make it through this. My fingers trailed the scar above my eyebrow, earned in Kandahar, when a roadside bomb exploded close enough to rattle my teeth, but not close enough to kill me. Back then, I learned to trust my gut over anyone else's plans. That lesson had saved my life more times than I could count. It would have to save me again now. The next morning, Sylvia called early, too early for her usual rhythm. "Hannah, your death certificate was filed by a notary public we can trace back to someone named Victoria Lang." That name mean anything? My blood went cold. Victoria Lang wasn't just anyone. She had been my father's executive assistant for years. A woman who knew every detail of his life and loyally ran his errands, signed his checks, booked his flights. She'd been quiet, efficient, and visible. Of course he'd used her. Symbolism rippled through the thought, my own erasure certified by a woman whose whole professional life had been about making herself invisible. Lang was a mirror of what Jackson expected all women around him to be: compliant, silent, useful, until expendable. That night, I drove out to Lang's suburban home, a tidy, split level that looked like it belonged in a postcard. I didn't knock at the door. I just waited, watching from my car until her kitchen light switched off and she emerged carrying her garbage cans to the curb. I stepped out, careful, deliberate. "Victoria," I called softly. She froze, the lid of the trash bin still in her hand. When she turned, her face drained of color. "Hannah," she said. Not a question. She knew exactly who I was, and exactly what I knew. "What did he offer you?" I asked. No point playing coy. Her voice was thin, cracking around the edges. "He said you wouldn't fight it. He said, it was just paperwork." I stepped closer. "You signed a document that declared me dead, Victoria. You didn't think I'd come back." She looked down at the ground, shame pooling in her silence. Then she whispered, "It wasn't just him. Sloan was there too. She brought the papers. She said it was part of a corporate restructuring plan. That you had agreed. Sloan." I should have known. She was always too quiet during that will reading, too composed. That was the thread I needed. The next day, Sylvia filed an injunction on my behalf, freezing Keller Dynamics' assets while we prepared a legal challenge. But it wasn't enough. I needed something bigger, something public, something Jackson couldn't control. That's when I called Nash Wilder, an old friend, and now an investigative reporter with a reputation for blowing up corporate scandals. I didn't have to explain much. The moment I mentioned Keller Dynamics inheritance fraud and a forged death certificate, he said, "When can you meet tonight?" By midnight, we were sitting in a dive bar where the floor still stuck to your shoes, and I laid out everything: the USB, the death certificate, Lang's confession, Sloane's involvement. Nash listened, nodding slowly, tapping notes into his phone. Then he leaned forward and asked Hannah, "What do you want out of this, revenge or survival?" The question surprised me. For a long moment, I didn't answer. Finally, I said both. "But survival first." He smiled like that was exactly the right answer. When I left that bar, the air felt different, sharp, bracing, alive. I walked slowly to my car, taking in every detail of the empty streets, the glow of the traffic lights, the feel of my boots on cracked concrete. I was back, fully back. And this time, I wasn't here to beg for my place in the family. I was here to burn down the lies they built and leave them watching. And in the dark quiet of that drive home, I finally allowed myself to imagine what Grandpa Frank would say if he saw me now. Probably something simple, dry, and cutting. "Told you they'd try it," he'd say. "Glad you didn't blink." I didn't plan to blink now either. But before I could take another step forward, I needed one last piece: the document that had certified my death. Somewhere there had to be a signature that didn't match. Somewhere in the state archives, there was proof that my own family had tried to erase me, and that proof was going to be my hammer. As I unlocked my apartment door, the phone rang. "Sylvia." Her voice was tight. "You're going to want to see this in person. Meet me tomorrow. Early." Her tone said everything. We were about to hit the next level. Sylvia's office smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old leather when I stepped inside just after sunrise. The air felt thick with anticipation, like the pause before a storm finally breaks. She sat at her cluttered desk, shoulders squared, fingers steepled over a thin manila folder. The way she looked at me made my stomach tighten, that mix of focus and guarded empathy you see in people who've walked dark roads themselves. Without preamble, she pushed the folder toward me. "Found it," she said simply, "the smoking gun." I opened the folder carefully, like it might bite. Inside was a copy of the court filing that had certified me dead. On its face, it looked official, state-sealed judge's signature, all the right stamps. But in the corner beneath the sterile bureaucratic language sat a single signature that didn't belong there, mine. Or at least it was supposed to be. Sylvia slid a magnifying glass across the desk, pointing to the loops and angles of the pen strokes. "This is your father's notary. Victoria Lang filed it as authorized by you. But see this, your signature here. It's lifted straight from your military discharge papers. We compared them side by side." She held up a side-by-side printout, and there it was in plain sight. Same curvature, same pressure pattern, same tiny flaw in the cross of the H that I'd made signing forms in Kandahar after a sleepless night. Identical. Too identical. A copied artifact pasted into a document I'd never seen. "Sloppy forgery," Sylvia murmured. "But they counted on no one looking too closely. You were supposed to stay dead." My breath caught as I ran my finger over the paper's surface. This wasn't just a legal trick, it was a deliberate act of symbolic violence, an erasure of my very name from the records that made me real. My father hadn't just stolen my inheritance. He had tried to scrub me from history itself, reducing me to ash like that check he burned. The message was clear. You don't exist without my permission. But his arrogance had always been his weakness. Sylvia was watching me carefully, studying my reaction, like she expected me to snap. I didn't. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind of focus that came in firefights when the bullets zipped close enough to hear. "How fast can we get this into court?" I asked. "That's where it gets tricky," Sylvia said. "They filed it under an emergency sealed motion. Family court maneuver. We can challenge it, but it'll take time. Time they're using right now to consolidate control over Keller Dynamics." My fingers drummed against the edge of her desk. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, a daughter stripped of her name, so the family business could carry on without her shadow. But there were other ways to fight, ways my father never anticipated. Power, I realized, isn't just about what's written down. It's about what people believe. I needed allies and leverage fast, so I made my next move. That afternoon, I met Nash Wilder at a greasy diner on the edge of town, a place where the booths were cracked. The coffee refilled too often, and the waitresses knew to look the other way when conversations turned dark. Nash looked rougher than the last time I saw him, but his eyes still carried that same restless energy, like he lived for the smell of a good story burning. He slid into the booth across from me, flipping open his battered reporter's notebook. "I've been digging," he said before I could even speak. "Your father's prepping Keller Dynamics for a full acquisition by an investment fund based in Luxembourg. Quiet deal. Paperwork's in motion. If it closes, you won't just be disinherited, you'll be erased from the future too. Everything your grandfather built will be out of reach." His words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about legacy, about memory, about who got to tell the story after all this was done. "And here's the kicker," Nash continued, lowering his voice. "Your sister Sloane is spearheading the deal. She's already filed corporate amendments under the assumption you're dead. She's betting no one will question it. So that's why she was so quiet during the will reading." Sloane had always played the long game. If Jackson was the storm loud and obvious, she was the tide slow, steady, inevitable. That realization should have broken me, but it didn't. It clarified everything. "This isn't just fraud," I said quietly. "This is a coordinated conspiracy." Nash nodded grimly. "Exactly. And if we expose this publicly, it becomes radioactive. No investor will touch a company with that kind of scandal. But I need one more thing to blow this open, hard proof that you're alive. Documentation and a statement, on camera." The irony twisted in my gut. After a lifetime of trying to disappear from their judgment, now I had to stand fully visible, loudly alive. But it made sense. Jackson and Sloane had tried to kill me symbolically. The most powerful response was to be undeniably, incontrovertibly present. I told Nash I'd do it. That night, back in my apartment, I dug through the last remnants of my old life. The footlocker from my Army days. A battered file of VA paperwork, my original birth certificate, tucked behind a dog-eared copy of Catch-22 that Grandpa Frank gave me when I turned 16. Every piece of paper with my name on it became a weapon, an anchor, a symbol that I was still here, still real. I stayed up past midnight, assembling it all, laying out documents on the floor, like puzzle pieces, that when put together spelled out one thing clearly: I exist. You can't erase me. Before I went to bed, I picked up Frank's envelope again, the one I'd carried everywhere since that day at Keller & Morris. I hadn't looked at the handwritten note tucked inside, but I finally unfolded it. The note was short, and in his shaky, familiar scrawl. "Hannah, you're the only one I trust because you understand what this is really about. Not just money. It's about who gets to define you. Don't let them write your ending." That sentence burned into my brain as I drifted to sleep, exhaustion finally winning. The next morning, Nash brought over his videographer, a young woman named Jessie, who looked too polished for my cramped, messy apartment, but worked with efficient, silent precision. The camera felt foreign and intrusive at first, but then something inside me clicked, the same instinct that kicked in during combat operations, when orders needed to be given calmly, clearly, without hesitation. So I spoke. I told the camera everything about the will, the meeting at Keller & Morris, the check set on fire, the forged death certificate, the corporate scheme. I spoke about legacy and power, about what it felt like to come home from a war overseas, only to discover the real war was here in boardrooms and courtrooms fought with paperwork instead of bullets, but just as deadly. And then I said the words that felt truest of all: my name is Hannah Keller. I'm alive, and I won't let anyone write me out of my own life. Jessie packed up her gear quietly after we finished, but I could see the look in her eyes, sympathy, yes, but also respect. After they left, I stood by the window watching the city wake up, wondering what would happen when that video hit the internet. I knew what Jackson would do: deny, deflect, accuse me of mental instability, paint me as unstable, emotional damaged, a soldier too broken to understand what was happening. But it wouldn't matter. The truth was already moving, and once it moved, it couldn't be stopped. The last thing I did before heading to Sylvia's office that afternoon was call Victoria Lang. Her voice was tight when she answered. "Hannah, You thought wrong," I interrupted. "Meet me tonight. Same diner Nash and I used. You'll tell me everything, or you'll tell it to a subpoena." There was a long pause, then quietly, "Okay, I'll come." And that's where I left it, on the edge of a meeting that could blow everything wide open. By the time I stepped out of my building, the cold wind whipped down the street sharp as a blade. But it felt good, bracing, like a reminder that I was still here, still moving, still undeniable. I zipped up my coat, tucked Frank's note into my pocket, and stepped into the wind. Because this story was mine now, and they couldn't rewrite me without a fight. Sylvia's office was quiet when I arrived mid-morning, the same stale coffee smell thick in the air. She sat behind her desk with Victoria Lang across from her. Victoria looked drained, pale eyes, red-rimmed. The way she avoided looking at me felt like guilt and fear rolled into one. Sylvia didn't waste time. She set a recorder on the desk and said, "Victoria, we need a full statement on the record. Anything you say can and will be used in court." Victoria swallowed hard, straightened her back, and began. She described the day she signed the paperwork at Jackson's house, the rush of decisions, the persuasion. She said Jackson delivered the documents describing them as a state cleanup. She said Sloan was there quiet, but watching as if she'd rehearsed exactly what to say when the time came. "I didn't know it was a death certificate," Victoria said. I didn't read it carefully. My chest clenched at her words, not for her confession, but because I recognized exactly the kind of quiet compliance they engineered someone who thinks they're out of the storm only to find themselves swept in. Sylvia turned off the recorder and slid the transcript to me. "That's enough for a lawsuit and for Nash's next piece. But you need to be ready because they're going to push back." Outside the office, I paused in the hallway staring at my reflection in the window. The face looking back at me was the same, but everything else had changed. I felt sharper, smaller, harder. I heard Grandpa Frank's voice, "You know what to do." That afternoon, Nash called. The story was live. Headline: Daughter declared dead, shocking, Keller inheritance scandal, explained. I watched the metrics climb like shares, comments. It was a wildfire. Journalists were filling the comments with links to court records, corporate filings, and thoughtful analysis about corporate gatekeeping, women's erasure and power dynamics, and the brutal ease with which patriarchy can dissolve a daughter's identity. My phone blew up with messages, some supportive, some angry, some wild conspiracy theories. One message stood out, an email from an anonymous whistleblower inside Keller Dynamics, offering to share internal emails about the transfer of shares, asset dumping ahead of acquisition. They asked for meeting details, time and place. I stared at that email for a long minute. A risk, but it felt like the door swinging open. I replied, "Meet me tonight at Centennial Park, 9 p.m. That night, I wrapped a scarf around my neck and walked the quiet paths of the park, wading through shadows under old oaks. I spotted a man ahead, tall hooded hands deep in pockets. I approached slowly. He glanced at me and lifted one hand, holding a flash drive. I nodded. He whispered emails from Jackson to Sloan. "They planned the transfer 3 weeks before your grandfather died." He pressed the drive into my hand, then stepped back. No recordings, no pictures, and vanished into the darkness. I stood there, heart hammering. Proof, real internal proof that this wasn't just civil fraud, it was a conspiracy. It was paper-thin courage held together by fear. That drive could blow the acquisition off the rails, but I had to protect him. And I had to bring it to Sylvia and Nash. The next day I handed both the flash drive and the Aurora Park meeting transcript to Sylvia. Her face darkened as she skimmed the files. "This is gold," she said softly. "Emails collusion sealed death strategy. It's criminal." She paused. "But your whistleblower might be compromised. We need a backup plan in case Jackson threatens them." My mind raced. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for anyone trying to resist the system that erased me. But I felt the weight of that responsibility echoing in my spine. That afternoon, I stood in front of a mirror and packed a bag laptop original documents, the flash drive, a packed charger, and a black blazer. I paused before leaving, running my hand over the scar above my eyebrow. A symbol not of trauma, but of the moment I realized I couldn't vanish without a fight. I walked into the lobby of Keller Dynamics HQ. Security recognized me from news features and background checks. They didn't say anything. I flashed my ID and walked to the executive lounge. I was here to meet with the board solo. They weren't ready. I could tell from their eyes behind cold glasses. Jackson sat at the head of the table, perfect suit, smug smile. Sloan next to him, stone-faced. Jackson started with his rehearsed angle. "Hannah's claims are baseless." But I didn't wait. I laid the flash drive and transcript in front of them. "Emails dated June 5th, I said. Signed dits, transfers, voting shares, real estate, all before your father's signature before my grandfather passed." My voice was calm. Quiet storms scare people more than screaming winds. Silence. Then Jackson's voice cracked. That drive could be planted. Test it, I replied. Bring in a forensic team. I'll authorize anything. I looked directly at Sloan. Did you plan this? Sloan's face flickered with something hate-regret. I didn't wait for her answer. I looked at every executive in that room. Chief Financial Officer Emma Riley. You signed off on that share transfer. Did we meet on June 6th? Emma swallowed, glanced at Jackson, and nodded. Yes, she said. I verified the transfer, Hannah's name on the document fraud. That was the moment. Boardroom eyes widened, whispers started, papers rustled. Jackson's mask cracked. If they were betting on my silence, they lost. If they were betting on compliance, they lost. I left before anyone could stop me. I walked through the lobby security, noticing but silent the weight of the boardroom buzz following me down the hall. Outside, the day felt different, brighter, clearer, light pouring into every corner. But I wasn't done yet. I pulled out my phone and whispered to Sylvia. They're on the ropes. Are we ready to call this in? Her reply, bring it all to court. We've got everything. As I lowered my phone, I saw a group of employees stop and watch as I walked away. Some nodded quiet solidarity. Some stared shocked. The world was watching them, and they were cracking. I barely slept that night. Even after walking out of Keller Dynamics headquarters, after laying the truth bare in that boardroom, I couldn't quiet my mind. My hands shook when I made tea at 2 a.m., and I kept replaying the look on Jackson's face when I confronted him. The arrogance cracked just enough to show the rot beneath. But it wasn't over, not yet. Exposure was one thing, consequence was another. At dawn, I sat cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, papers spread around me like a war map. Every document from Sylvia, every printout from the flash drive, my original discharge papers, my military ID, my birth certificate, all proof of life, all anchors to reality. But in America, truth isn't what's true. It's what's believed, recorded, processed, stamped. And Jackson still had power lawyers' reputation spin machines. He would use all of them. The sun had barely cleared the rooftops when Sylvia called. We have a hearing, she said. The emergency injunction worked. The court's reviewing Keller Dynamics freeze order and your death certificate challenge. Tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. A single word heavy with consequence. A day that would decide everything, whether my name, my identity, my inheritance, my grandfather's legacy would be restored or lost. My heartbeat stayed steady, but something cold sat in my gut. I knew Jackson wouldn't wait for court to fight back. He'd strike first quietly where it hurt most. Sure enough, by noon, my phone lit up with an anonymous number. I hesitated, then answered. Hannah, a woman's voice said, smooth, careful, familiar. Sloan? I thought you preferred letting lawyers speak for you, I said flatly. Meet me. We need to talk privately. Just you and me. No attorneys, no journalists. I hesitated. This felt wrong. But it also felt inevitable. Sisters who spend a lifetime avoiding honesty eventually have to sit in the same room and admit what they are, rivals, mirrors, scars. Where I asked, our family cabin, Bear Lake, sunset. Symbolism so thick, it almost made me laugh. Bear Lake, the place Grandpa Frank loved most, the place where I learned how to swim, and where Sloan once pushed me off a dock, laughing as I sank. Fitting. The sight of one betrayal, now the sight of another reckoning. I didn't tell Sylvia. I didn't bring Nash. I packed carefully, phone fully charged, GPS shared location, enabled a copy of the most important documents zipped into an inside jacket pocket, and I drove. Bear Lake looked almost exactly the same. Stillwater reflecting trees turned gold with fall. The little dock sagging at one end, the cabin's roof patched hastily. The front porch still cluttered with an old rocking chair Grandpa used to claim was his thinking chair. I parked and stepped out, letting the air hit me crisp, earthy, tinged with the kind of nostalgia that fools you into forgetting the pain. Sloan was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, hair tied back, perfectly polished as always. But there was something different in her face, a strain around the eyes, a tension in her jaw. Hannah, she said, no warmth, no fake smile, just my name bare and unadorned. I stayed 3 paces away. You wanted to talk. So talk. She gestured toward the old wooden bench by the lake's edge. Not here, she said. By the water. Always controlling the setting. Always controlling the terms. But I followed partly because I wanted to hear her. partly because some deep part of me still remembered childhood summers here before everything broke, before power and loyalty defined our family. We sat. Silence stretched between us. A heron skimmed the lake's surface, its reflection rippling. Finally, Sloane spoke, her voice tight but deliberate. "You've already won the narrative," she said. "The media's eating it up. Jackson can't fix this with a press release. He's furious." "Good, but I didn't say that." I let her keep talking. "Do you really think you can run Keller Dynamics?" she asked. "This isn't a TV show. It's not just your revenge story. It's contracts, boardrooms, complex international partnerships. You're a soldier, Hannah, not an executive." There it was. The belief at the heart of this war, that I didn't belong, that military service somehow made me unfit for business, for leadership, for legacy, that my scars were disqualifying rather than defining. "I'm exactly who should run it," I said quietly. "Because I understand loyalty. I understand risk. I understand how to rebuild when everything's broken. And because Frank Keller left it to me, not you." Her expression cracked for just a second, enough for me to see that this wasn't just business for her. It was personal. She didn't just want the company, she wanted to erase me, because my existence proved she was never the heir Frank wanted. "Dad's willing to negotiate," she said suddenly, shifting gears. "He'll offer you a settlement. Cash." "Quiet. You disappear again and let this go." I almost laughed. "You still think this is about money?" Her mouth tightened. "Isn't it?" "No," I said simply. "It's about story. About who writes the family history after this. You and Jackson tried to write me out. I'm writing myself back in." The wind picked up, rippling the lake, rustling the leaves. Somewhere behind us, a branch cracked. Sloane looked away toward the cabin. Her next words dropped like a stone in the water. "You don't know everything. About Grandpa. About why he left it to you. A twist, but a bluffer truth." I didn't bite. "Then tell me," I said, calm and steady. She hesitated just long enough for me to know she didn't have it, or didn't dare reveal it yet. Instead, she stood abruptly. "You've made your choice," she said. "Tomorrow, you'll have to face what comes next." I watched her walk back toward the cabin, stiff and composed, but shrinking with every step. The image stuck with me, Sloane retreating, her power faltering, her mask slipping. As dusk fell, I stayed on that bench for another hour, letting the air cool around me, replaying every word she said, every flicker of doubt in her face. The family cabin, Bear Lake, the very symbols of our shared childhood, had become battlegrounds, but the water stayed still, patient, reflecting the sky without care. On the drive back, headlights slicing the night, I realized the most important thing she revealed. They were afraid. Jackson and Sloane weren't invincible. They were cornered, and cornered people make mistakes. The cabin itself symbolized the illusion of permanence, a place that looked the same while everything else changed, a reminder that buildings outlast families, but not truths. By the time I reached my apartment, Nash had texted. "More leaks coming," he wrote. "Someone inside Keller Dynamics is ready to go on the record." A knot loosened in my chest. The cracks were widening. But I also knew Sloane's parting words weren't empty. Tomorrow's hearing would be brutal. Jackson would bring his best legal team. Sloane would sit in court serene and polished while their lawyers questioned my stability, my past, my motives. And there beneath all their tactics lay the deeper societal fault line: who gets believed? The soldier daughter who went silent for years, or the respectable businessman and his perfect corporate heir? I was walking straight into that fight, no illusions. And somehow, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I felt steadier than ever. Every scar, every betrayal, every attempt to erase me, they weren't liabilities. They were armor. Tomorrow I wouldn't just fight for an inheritance. I'd fight for my name. And this time they'd have to see me. All of me. The courthouse felt colder than it should have that morning. A cavern of marble and glass where reputations were stripped bare and families imploded under oath. I arrived early, wearing the same black blazer I'd chosen for the boardroom confrontation. Boots, polished, hair pulled back tight. No jewelry, no pretense. Just clean lines and purpose. The hallway outside the courtroom was already humming, reporters clustered near the doors. Clerks murmured in corners, and people pretending they weren't watching absolutely were. Inside, Sylvia sat waiting at our table, calm but sharp, like a soldier in the minutes before deployment. She met my eyes and gave a subtle nod. "They've brought their full legal team," she said under her breath. But you've got more than they do, truth and documentation. I felt steady, not fearless, but deliberate. Jackson sat at the opposite table, flanked by two attorneys in expensive suits. Sloan was beside him, pristine in a navy dress, hair, immaculate face, unreadable. If there was a single crack in her mask, she wasn't showing it now. When Judge Reyes entered, everyone stood. He was known for precision and impatience, perfect for a case that would inevitably try to drown the truth in technicalities. The proceedings began fast. Jackson's lead attorney, a man named Price, rose first, dripping with practiced charm. "Your Honor, our position is simple. Miss Keller is mistaken. Her claim of forgery is unsupported. Her death certificate was filed as a protective legal measure due to concerns over her mental state." There it was, the same playbook I expected. The framing, not a dispute over documents, but over me, my mind, my credibility. They wanted the courtroom to believe I was unstable, a damaged soldier grasping for attention and money. Price continued weaving a narrative that painted me as volatile, erratic, fragile, as if military service had left me permanently broken. I sat still, letting his words float over me, because I knew what Sylvia would do next. When it was our turn, Sylvia rose slowly, every movement controlled. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and firm, "this is not a question of mental fitness. This is a question of forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. We will prove that Miss Keller was declared dead using falsified documentation without her knowledge or consent, while her family transferred control of Keller Dynamics." Then she called her first witness, Victoria Lang. Victoria entered, looking pale, her hands trembling as she was sworn in. Under questioning, she confirmed everything the day Jackson handed her the documents. The rushed signatures, Sloan's silent oversight, her own failure to read what she was notarizing. She admitted she hadn't even realized she was certifying my death. It was a crucial admission, not just mistake, but negligence that enabled Jackson's scheme. Next, Sylvia introduced the forensic report from Miles, our handwriting analyst, who laid out in excruciating detail how my signature on the death certificate was a digital copy lifted from my military file. The visual comparison on the courtroom monitor was damning perfect overlap, pixel-perfect lines, a clone, not a signature. And then came the whistleblower. Nash had tracked him down, convinced him to testify under protection. He sat stiffly on the stand, visibly nervous but resolute. He confirmed the email's internal communications between Jackson and Sloan, outlining the plan to erase me on paper while maneuvering Keller Dynamics for acquisition. When he read out loud Jackson's line from one email, "Once she's dead on record, we can fast-track the sale." There was an audible gasp in the courtroom. At that moment, I looked directly at Jackson. For the first time, he wouldn't meet my gaze. Sloan stared straight ahead, frozen. When Sylvia finished her case, she returned to her seat beside me. "That's the whole arsenal," she whispered. "Now it's up to Reyes." Judge Reyes took a long moment before speaking. The courtroom felt breathless, and when he did speak, his voice was calm but absolute. "I find the evidence of forgery and fraud credible and overwhelming," he said. "The court recognizes that Miss Hannah Keller is and has been alive, and that the death certificate was filed improperly and fraudulently. Furthermore, I am freezing all transactions made under that false certification. Control of Keller Dynamics reverts immediately to Miss Keller as sole legal heir." The words hit me like a wave, not shock, but release. For the first time in years, I felt the full weight of my own existence, acknowledged not just by a judge, but by the system that tried to erase me. I felt the room shift around me. The balance of power had tilted, and Jackson, once so smug now, sat slumped, hands clenched white on the table. But Reyes wasn't finished. He looked directly at Jackson and Sloan and added, "The matter of criminal fraud will be referred to the district attorney for further investigation." It was the final blow, and I saw it land. Jackson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Sloan's mask finally cracked. Her lips parted. Her hands trembled ever so slightly. She whispered something to Price, but it was too late. The court had spoken. After Reyes adjourned, I stood slowly, my movements deliberate. No rush, no triumphalism, just a quiet reclaiming of space. I turned toward Jackson and Sloan, meeting their eyes, not with gloating, but with the steel calm of someone who had survived everything they threw at her, and more. And then I walked out, boots clicking on polished marble, straight-backed, unhurried, free. The cameras waited outside. I said nothing. Just kept walking down the steps, past the reporters, past the questions shouted into cold air. That night in my apartment, I opened a bottle of cheap red wine and sat at my kitchen table staring at the deed and documents Judge Reyes had returned to me. Paperwork that symbolized something far greater than money or property. These were documents that confirmed what my grandfather had known all along, that I was capable of carrying the legacy forward, that I wouldn't bend or break under the weight of betrayal. I thought back to Bear Lake, the heron on the water, the stillness, the dock, where Sloan once laughed as I struggled to swim. That lake was still there. The cabin was still there. The symbolism intact, a place that had taught me resilience, even before I understood what that meant. But I didn't need Bear Lake anymore. I needed to build something new, something that wasn't a reaction to my family's cruelty, but a testament to endurance. 2 days later, I signed the papers to convert my grandfather's old downtown property, an abandoned warehouse he'd left me quietly, almost as an afterthought, into a nonprofit center for women veterans. A place that offered housing assistance, career training, mental health support, all the things I wished I'd had when I first came back from deployment, only to find my own family had locked the door behind me. I named it the Frank Center after him, yes, but also after the quality I now prized above all else: frankness, honesty, clarity. The day we hung the new sign, Nash stood beside me. "You know, he said you could sell this story. Memoir deal, speaking circuit. Make it big." I smiled, but it was quiet, private. "I'm done performing for anyone," I said. "I already wrote the ending. And it's this." At that moment, I felt something lift. Not all wounds heal, but some become lighter, not by forgetting, but by being carried properly. And then, as if punctuating it all, my phone buzzed a message from Sylvia Jackson, just filed for bankruptcy. He's finished. But I didn't need that confirmation anymore. The true victory wasn't that Jackson and Sloan had lost. It was that they no longer defined me. I did. As the last light faded that evening, I stood in the doorway of the Frank Center, watching the streetlights flicker on people walking by, unaware of the war that had just ended, the names that had just been restored, the story that had just been reclaimed. And that was enough. Story 2. I'm Noah Carter, 19 years old, studying software engineering at a quiet state college here in Tucson. Honestly, I never thought I'd be telling this story publicly, but the last few months, they've changed me. And maybe, just maybe, my story will help someone else who's feeling invisible at home. If you've ever felt erased by your own family, we'll pull up a chair. Growing up, we lived in a typical suburban neighborhood in Mesa Picture cul-de-sacs, lined with identical 2-story homes, each with a backyard pool nobody really used. Ours was one of them, 4 bedrooms, a dusty backyard with a tired orange tree, and a garage that smelled like oil and wood dust, because my dad Sam was always working on some half-finished project in there. Dad? Yeah. He was my hero. He taught me how to fix an engine before I could legally drive, how to install Linux on an old desktop when I was 8. And he even coached my t-ball team, despite hating sports. He had that kind of energy, the show-up, even if you're exhausted kind. Until he didn't. When I was 10, Dad collapsed mowing the lawn. Heart attack just like that. 39 years old. No warning, no family history, no goodbye. You don't bounce back from that kind of loss at 10 years old. Not really. After Dad was gone, it was just me and my mom, Dana. At least at first. Dana was complicated. She held it together externally, never missed a day at her job as an office administrator. But inside, I think she resented being left with me, resented the house itself. She was distant, impatient. Before Dad died, she was already a bit cold. After, she froze entirely. Then along came Grant, my future stepfather. I still remember the first time I met him, at this awful backyard BBQ Mom threw for her coworkers. He was loud, all flashy smiles and stories about business opportunities. The guy wore sunglasses even after the sun went down. Red flag right. They married 6 months later. I was barely 12. When Grant moved in, he brought baggage, literal and figurative. His 14-year-old daughter, Madison, was trouble from day one. Imagine every stereotype of the mean girl, entitled, sneering, manipulative. She'd steal my snacks and my chargers, mess up my schoolwork on purpose, and then gaslight me about it. "Why are you so paranoid, Noah?" She'd laugh, while Mom and Grant always took her side. "Noah, she's your sister now, you need to get along." That phrase haunted me. Sister? She wasn't my sister. She was a wrecking ball aimed right at whatever piece I had left. Grant, meanwhile, was even worse beneath his faux charm exterior. A guy who loved driving around town in his leased Tesla, wearing fake Rolexes, bragging about crypto deals that never materialized. I later found out his so-called consulting firm was nothing but a desperate pyramid scheme. He spent mornings working from home, which mostly meant watching sports talk shows in sweatpants and gambling online. By the time I was 15, I knew I was on my own emotionally, so I focused. I kept my grades up. Got a part-time job fixing computers at a repair shop run by an older guy named Mr. Patel, a sharp, quiet man who became an accidental mentor to me. Every dollar I earned, I squirreled away. I didn't trust keeping it in the bank. Madison was too nosy, so I hid cash in an old toolbox in the attic crawl space above my room. Over 3 years, I quietly saved almost $9,000. But my home life never got better. Madison got bolder, Grant got lazier, and Mom, she distanced herself more and more. By my senior year, it was as if she barely registered my existence. So when my 18th birthday rolled around last fall, I wasn't expecting much, a card maybe. Instead, I got an eviction notice, literally. That evening, I stepped off the bus after my shift at Mr. Patel's shop. My backpack felt heavier than usual, not because of its weight, but because of this quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd remember it was my birthday. Instead, Grant was standing in the driveway, leaning on his Tesla, with a smugness I will never forget, holding my battered old suitcase that Dad had taken me camping with when I was 8. "Noah," he said without even looking me in the eye. "It's time. 18 means adult. Adult means get out." I thought he was joking. But behind him, Madison was filming it all on her phone, laughing. "Get it for TikTok," Madison, Grant sneered. "This is gonna go viral." I froze, completely. Then Mom stepped out of the garage, arms crossed, not even meeting my gaze. "It's time for you to learn responsibility," she said flatly. "We discussed this." That sentence broke something inside me. We discussed this, discussed my homelessness apparently. I couldn't process it. All I could do was ask, but where am I supposed to go? Her answer, "You're smart, Noah. Figure it out." I felt like I'd been punched. My body was shaking, adrenaline-pumping rage simmering under every breath. But I didn't cry, not in front of them. Madison, still filming, chimed in one last time, "Bye, loser." Then they slammed the door. I stood there, suitcase at my feet, until my neighbor, Mr. Ortega, an old retired mechanic who'd lived next door for years, shuffled over from his porch. He'd watched the whole thing quietly, but now he said just 5 words that changed everything. "Noah, you know that house's story." Confused, I shook my head. He nodded toward the house I'd grown up in, the house they'd just thrown me out of, and said, "That house ain't your mom's. It's yours." I stared at him, speechless. "Come by my garage tonight," he added quietly. "I got something to show you." That's where everything shifted. I wasn't just some disposable kid anymore. I had leverage I didn't even know about. And I was about to learn how much that house really belonged to me. That night, after walking aimlessly for hours with my suitcase dragging behind me, I finally knocked on Mr. Ortega's garage door just before midnight. The place smelled like motor oil and old leather, a familiar, comforting scent. He was sitting at his workbench, polishing a carburetor, as if he'd been waiting for me all along. Without a word, he handed me a battered manila folder. Inside were copies of old deeds, wills, and a faded photo I recognized instantly. My grandfather standing in front of this very house, keys in hand, smiling with pride. I sat down slowly, heart pounding. That house, Mr. Ortega began, was bought by your grandfather in 1982. Paid off every dime. When he passed, your dad inherited it outright. But here's the kicker, Noah. When your dad died, this property wasn't supposed to pass to your mom alone. It was put into trust. For you. I could barely speak. "How do you even have this?" He sighed. "Your dad was a good man. He showed me the paperwork years ago. Said if anything happened, I should keep a copy just in case things went sideways." I shook my head in disbelief, but I knew deep down it made sense. It explained why my mom never sold the house after Dad died, because legally she couldn't. She and Grant Ortega continued. They've been living there as trustees, not owners. Everything they did, renting out the guest house to that college guy, taking out loans, I'd bet my wrench they never told the bank who really owned it. I exhaled sharply. My house, the one they threw me out of, was mine all along. Mr. Ortega leaned in, eyes narrowing kindly. "You're not powerless, kid. But don't rush back there yelling. Do it right." And right there, we formed an alliance. He let me sleep in his spare room that night, a little room behind his garage, where he kept an old recliner, some books, and a cot that smelled faintly of cedar. It wasn't much, but it felt like sanctuary. The next morning, he put a strong black coffee in my hand and gave me a name, Eva Chen, a real estate attorney he trusted. "She helped me when my brother tried to scam me out of my own house," Ortega said. "She's sharp, honest, and she hates crooks." By noon, I was sitting in her small office downtown. Eva looked young, maybe late 30s, but had a no-nonsense air and a quick mind. She skimmed the papers Ortega had given me, and after about 10 minutes, she looked up. "Noah, this isn't complicated. They violated their duty as trustees. Not only did they fail to transfer the property on your 18th birthday, which they were legally required to do, but they misappropriated rental income and forcibly evicted you. I can file an emergency motion immediately." It felt surreal. I'd spent years feeling powerless in that house. Now I was suddenly holding all the cards. "Would it take long?" I asked. Eva smiled faintly. "Not as long as you think. We'll start by freezing any financial activity related to the property so they can't sell or refinance it. Then we'll file a claim for damages back rent they collected that should have gone to you. And if they took out any loans, fraud charges are likely." Hearing those words was like lifting a weight I didn't realize I was carrying. But Eva wasn't finished. "We also need witnesses," she said. "Anyone who can speak to your relationship with your parents, their behavior, and the way they treated you after your birthday." My mind instantly flashed to Mrs. Russo, the sweet older woman who lived 2 doors down. She'd baked me cookies when I was a kid and always waved when I walked by. She had seen what happened that night. I remembered the look on her face when she called out, "Noah, is everything okay?" as I walked down the street with my suitcase. And then there was Jake, the tenant, in our backyard guest house. He'd been renting from Grant and Mom for almost 2 years. He probably didn't know any of this. That afternoon, I knocked on Jake's door. He answered, holding a coffee mug, bleary-eyed. "Noah, man, I heard something weird went down last week. You okay?" I hesitated. "You got a minute? This might sound crazy, but it's about this house." Inside, as I told Jake the whole story, his expression changed from confusion to outright anger. "Dude," he said, "I had no idea. Grant always acted like he was the landlord. I've been handing him $900 a month in cash for almost 2 years. That money should have gone into a trust for me," I said. Jake didn't hesitate. "Anything you need, I'm in. I kept receipts." By the end of the day, I had Eva drafting affidavits from both Jake and Mrs. Russo. Even Mr. Ortega offered to testify about conversations he'd overheard when my dad was alive. As Eva worked late into the evening, filing motions, I couldn't stop thinking about my mother. She must have known. She wasn't naive. She let Grant kick me out her own son, knowing full well the house they owned was really mine. That betrayal cut deeper than I could admit to myself. At 10 p.m., my phone lit up, my mom's number. I didn't answer. Then a text appeared, "Noah, please come home. Let's talk." Home. That word stung. A second text from Grant followed. "You're making a mistake, kid. Don't push this." I blocked both numbers. They no longer had power over me. Eva called early the next morning. "Judge signed the temporary order," she said. "They can't sell, lease, or encumber the property until we sort this out in court." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about getting my house back. It was about getting myself back. But there was one last surprise before the day ended. As I walked past the house, my house on my way back to Mr. Ortega's, I saw a "for sale by owner" sign Grant had planted in the front yard. And standing next to it, grinning like a fox, was Madison, filming a video for her followers. "Hey guys," she chirped into her phone. "So looks like we're selling this house. Big new chapter ahead for the Lawsons." I couldn't help but laugh quietly to myself. They had no idea what was coming. By the end of that week, my emotions oscillated between steely determination and gut-twisting disbelief. I wasn't just fighting for a house anymore. I was fighting for the truth, and for respect I never got while growing up under that roof. Eva Chen wasted no time. She filed a petition for immediate declaratory judgment, essentially asking the court to affirm I was the legal owner of the property and that my mother and Grant had no standing to sell it. But Grant? Oh, Grant didn't go quietly. By Tuesday, his bravado was in full display again. He posted an online video on his pathetic business channel. One of those fake guru types rambling about how family loyalty was dead and ingrate kids trying to destroy their parents. The irony wasn't lost on me. Eva called later that day. The judge set a preliminary hearing for next week, she said. And Noah, they filed a counterclaim. Grant's alleging you're mentally unstable, that you threatened Madison. I almost dropped my phone. That's absurd, I said flatly. I haven't even spoken to Madison since that night. Eva sighed. It's a desperate play. We'll handle it. But it means this fight's going to get nastier. I wasn't surprised, but it still hit hard. Their cruelty was escalating because they realized their house of cards was collapsing and fast. That evening, I sat with Mr. Ortega in his garage. He handed me a cold soda, then leaned back in his chair and asked, "You ready for this, kid?" "I have to be," I replied. "Good," he said, "because this is where it gets dirty, and you need to stay calm, play it smart." And just when I thought things couldn't escalate further, they did. The very next morning, I got a text from Jake, my former tenant correction, my tenant. "Hey man, something weird just happened," he wrote. Grant and Madison showed up banging on the guest house door demanding back rent. Said if I didn't pay them directly, they'd evict me tomorrow. I stared at my phone furious. Eva's words echoed in my head. They're desperate now. That same afternoon, Eva filed an emergency motion for injunctive relief. Basically a formal court order preventing Grant and my mother from even approaching the property or contacting the tenant until the ownership dispute was resolved. The judge granted it that evening. The legal gears were turning fast, but emotionally, this was exhausting. In the midst of it all, my old friend Adam reached out. We hadn't talked much since I got kicked out, mostly because I was too embarrassed to admit what was happening. "Dude," he texted, "come hang tonight. We're having board game night. You need to get your mind off this garbage." I hesitated, but then realized he was right. At Adam's apartment, it was like a different world. Familiar faces, jokes about trivial things, normalcy. Even when they gently asked how I was doing, there was no judgment in their voices, just genuine concern. At one point, Adam pulled me aside. "You know," he said, "we all saw it. How your mom treated you growing up. Nobody had the guts to say it back then, but it wasn't right. You didn't deserve that." His words hit me harder than I expected. I think that was the first time someone acknowledged that my feelings weren't an exaggeration, that I wasn't crazy, that validation that mattered. But just as I was finally relaxing, Madison struck again. Around midnight, my phone blew up with screenshots from multiple friends. Madison had posted a lengthy Instagram story rant. "My psycho stepbrother is trying to steal our family home. He's lying to the court. He threatened me. He's a danger to everyone." Accompanied by a carefully staged crying selfie, of course. Her followers, thousands of them, were eating it up, spamming my social media profiles with hateful messages. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, Eva called with her lawyer voice, calm but sharp. "We expected this," she said. "Her smear campaign actually helps us. Her posts show she's willing to weaponize public opinion with no evidence. That reinforces that her counterclaim is frivolous." Eva was good at this, but emotionally, it was still brutal. Jake texted later that day too. "Hey man, FYI. Madison tried showing up again, but Mrs. Russo called the cops on her before she could even step on the lawn. Absolute legend." I couldn't help but smile. Mrs. Russo, quiet but fierce. Even though the legal system was on my side, the psychological warfare was non-stop. Every day felt like a new ambush. But something had shifted inside me. I wasn't reacting the way I used to. Where before I would have internalized every insult, questioned myself, retreated into silence. Bien quiet. Now I stood straighter, more grounded. And I realized why I finally believed myself. For years, I'd gaslit myself into thinking maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I'd exaggerated their cruelty. Maybe I was the problem. Not anymore. The hearing was approaching fast and I was ready. But on the eve of the hearing, something unexpected happened. My mother showed up at Mr. Ortega's driveway. I watched from inside the garage as she stepped out of Grant's Lexus wearing oversized sunglasses and clutching a designer handbag she definitely couldn't afford anymore. She didn't look smug this time. She looked desperate. She knocked hesitantly on the garage door. "Noah," she called out softly, "please? Can we talk? Just you and me, please." I froze. Mr. Ortega raised an eyebrow at me, but said nothing. My heart was pounding not from fear, but from anger and pity mixed together. Was this sincere or just another manipulation? I stepped outside, slowly keeping distance. Her voice trembled. I made mistakes, Noah. I let Grant influence me. I know that now. I miss you. It almost worked. Almost. But then she said the one sentence that revealed her true motive. You can't do this to your own mother. Ah, there it was. The guilt trip. The same old playbook. I stayed calm. I didn't do this to you, Mom, I said evenly. You did this to yourself. You kicked me out of my own house on my 18th birthday. Her face fell. She opened her mouth to argue, but for the first time in my life, I walked away before she could finish her sentence. I could hear her sobbing as I stepped back into Mr. Ortega's garage. But I didn't look back. The next morning was the hearing. As I put on the suit Adam had loaned me, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I didn't look like a scared kid anymore. I looked like someone ready for a fight and for justice.